It's been a while since J.R. Ewing set foot in Knots Landing. In fact, the last time Gary and Val recruited the Fairgates to help scuttle a deal that would have polluted the California shores with Ewing oil. This seemed, ironically, to earn Gary J.R.'s respect for the first time in his life.
Well, I gotta hand it to you, Gary. Starting to act like real Ewing.
Now, somehow, J.R. Ewing returned. Karen, Val, and Abby gossip about J.R. Ewing. Val, of course, still can't stand him. Karen found him handsome and charming when she seduced him the previous year. And Abby is insatiably curious about the man. Speaking of curiosity, both Val and Karen want to know who Abby is meeting up with at a hotel in the middle of the day.
I'm having a rendezvous with J.R. Ewing.
Val doesn't find that very funny. Val's husband and J.R.'s brother Gary is getting leaned on by the Orchid Cab Company. He tells them that it won't matter how long they give him, he just won't be able to come up with the $50,000 they want from him. It turns out Abby was not lying in the car. She actually was on her way to meet J.R. Ewing. But it's not for the romantic tryst that she implied. Instead, she pleads with J.R. on Gary's behalf to loan him the $50,000. Elsewhere, Kenny Ward's side piece Sylvie finds his divorce papers and wants to know why he's hiding the divorce from her. She wants to start over with him for real. Instead, Kenny breaks it off with her so he can pursue reconciliation with Ginger. Gary is upset with Abby for going to J.R. After all, Abby doesn't know what kind of strings are attached to Ewing money. She counters that Gary's going to get a lot more than his pride hurt if he can't come up with the Orchid money, and he tells her to back off. At the Fairgates, Michael cuts up Diana's yearbook to make his collage, triggering a fit from Diana. Karen tells her to take it easy on Michael because of the ADHD he was diagnosed with in the last episode. But Diana rails about the lack of fairness in this household. At the lunch Gary refused to attend, Abby earns her reputation as the J.R. Ewing of Knots Landing by manipulating J.R. into going to Gary and offering him the $50,000 with a story about how Val desperately wants to move back to Dallas to be closer to Lucy. But if Gary is successful, they'll never leave California. J.R. shows up at Knots Landing Motors, leading to one of the funniest hapless moments from Gary as he desperately tries to get out of dinner. But Abby and J.R. just keep pushing him on what a great idea it is. The best line is from Abby.
I know Valeen's dying to see you.
Oh, I bet she is.
Importantly for later, J.R. happens upon Sid while he's creating his new engine that will get 100 miles to the gallon. J.R. immediately becomes interested in the patent on that idea.
I must break you.
Ginger tells Karen about the pregnancy and the awkward position she's in now that Kenny and she are split. Diana comes in eating ice cream and gets yelled at for having unhealthy food in the house when Michael is around. This leads to a great Karen line.
I have great answers for other people's problems. It's only my own I have a little problem with.
Speaking of problems, Karen also becomes one for the Ewings as she tells them they have to go to Abby's dinner, even over both of their objections. Said dinner is also hilariously awkward, with Abby's kids annoying J.R., but not enough for him to stop from making an insincere toast to his family. Also at dinner, Sid basically lays out the entire design of the engine for J.R. before Karen cuts him off. Over at the Averys, Richard spies on Abby's dinner party and complains that they never go anywhere because Laura just collapses after a long day at work and putting dinner on the table. He also complains that they never talk anymore, even though he acted annoyed when Laura asked him to talk last episode.
I hope this is worth interrupting Ravel's pavane for a dead princess.
Thankfully, Laura calls him out on what's really bothering him. His mistress threw a party and she didn't invite him. The party continues its awkward trajectory as J.R. continues to complain about Lucy's choice in men and says he's going to make sure Lucy and Mitch are well taken care of. This sets off Valine, who tells J.R. to stay the hell away from her daughter. This one is pretty complex because Lucy has basically been raised by Ellie, Jock, J.R. and Sue Ellen for most of her life. But let's face it was probably Raoul and Teresa doing the real work at South Fork. Oh, and I'm sure that Ray had a hand in Lucy's rearing. Hey, I didn't write the shit. Anyway, Val still blames him for the lost time with Lucy, but it's important to note that Lucy had the option to move to California and she turned it down to stay in Dallas. Gary was the one who was cold and distant and made Lucy rethink her options in the first place. Yes, JR is interfering in Lucy's life, but Val also kind of sacrificed her right to say anything when she remarried Gary and moved to California without even telling Lucy. God, I feel like I'm watching Bellatown.
Just one time, and you know what? I don't give a if it was 1 time, 2 times, or 20 times. You shouldn't have did what the you did to me. And the fact that you were doing it in our bed, Kevin, where we make love, where we made a baby together, a baby that you aborted without telling me.
Anyway, maybe nobody interferes with Lucy's love life? Gary and Val storm out, and Val asks if Gary has gotten involved in a business deal with JR. He assures her that he has not. He does not mention the orchid sword of Damocles hanging over his head, though. Sid and Karen are also up, with Sid now spying on Abby's house, wondering when JR is going to leave. Michael gets up for his nightly in-the-dark circle walking and overhears them arguing about him. Sid thinks Karen coddles him too much and treats him like a freak. Karen said Sid is acting like there's nothing wrong with Michael. Meanwhile, JR has stayed behind to let Abby know that he's all cut up on her little scheme. He correctly susses out that she lied to him about Val's desire to move back to Dallas, and that Gary is into some bad dudes for $50,000 in a sort of kneecaps for hubcap scheme. JR promises to give the money if Abby gives him something he wants. And I think we all know what that is. She agrees, but the money comes first. JR also realizes they have something in common. They both want Gary to be with Abby instead of Valine. Gary scolds Abby for her interference, but she says she's keeping him out of a wheelchair. Val comes by to see JR right in the middle of him telling Quigley not to cave on negotiations over oil leases. You all remember Quigley, right? JR's go-to negotiator? No? Come on! It's Quigley, guys! Quigley! Anyway, it's always funny when JR visits Knots Landing and we find out about people who are on his payroll that we never actually see on Dallas. In fact, we rarely see any Ewing Oil employees outside of the secretaries and the occasional wildcatter. Ironically, Val comes to beg JR not to get Gary embroiled in any business schemes, since everything is going just fine for Gary now, and she doesn't want to see it get ruined. I actually love this Rube Goldbergian dynamic of Abby asking for the money so she can get closer to Gary, JR only giving the money because he wants to get with Abby and to screw over Valine, Gary not wanting the money because JR is worse than the Orchid people, and Valine also not wanting JR to give the money for the same reasons, but having no idea that Gary got himself into this mess. This is some evil gift of the Magi shit right here. Val storms out again and says she wishes she was the one who shot JR in a mean-spirited but funny line because she bonded with that very person just a few episodes ago and didn't even know it. Kenny comes back to Ginger after breaking things off with Sylvie, but Ginger is still with Carl and she's not gonna just let Kenny come back into her life. That would be really stupid, especially with those anger issues of his. At the fair gates, Michael tells Karen he feels guilty that everyone has to adjust their lives to him. Diana hates him, and Eric, Sid, and Karen all have to spend hours out of their day making sure he's exhausted. He feels like he's more trouble than he's worth. Karen basically tells him that's loser talk, and that's what families do. The Orchid boys show up at Knots Landing Motors for a little talk with Gary, but what Abby didn't know is that Gary comes from a family of bar brawlers, so he simply beats the crap out of one of them. The boys back off. For now. That's one way to cut the Gordian knot. At the hotel, Gary collects his check from JR, who employs Gary to think bigger, to buy more stolen parts, to kick more puppies, to evict more widows and orphans. Gary finds this talk distasteful, but JR rightly points out that Sid was never down with this deal, and Gary isn't doing it for Sid. He's doing it for himself. The Ewing way.
You're not talking Sid, you're talking power. You're talking adrenaline and how it surges through your veins when you got something that everybody else wants.
Gary's suspicions prove right, though. JR doesn't give him the $50,000 check. He gives him a briefcase with $100,000 cash. Oh, and he just happens to bring up Sid's engine and how it would be a shame if something were to happen to it. See? Callback. And we're out. I enjoyed this one immensely thanks to the complex relationships and motivations of the characters. We get to see just how much of a schemer Abby Cunningham really is, after several episodes of her just being the next-door MILF. And we also see that, like JR, she doesn't take no for an answer. This is also where we see a clear dividing line between Valine and Abby. Valine represents contentment, warmth, and family, while Abby represents verve, adrenaline, and of course, sex. Abby doesn't have a problem with Gary making a deal to buy stolen parts under her brother's nose. She just wants him to be successful at it. On the other hand, Valine wants a nice middle-class family life without Gary running too far or too fast. And at the end, JR rightly points out that that's not going to happen with Gary. He's a Ewing after all, and he lives for the juice. That's why he got into this deal in the first place, and why he looks the other way about the stolen parts. And that's why he and Valine aren't meant for one another. Gary even says in a previous episode that Sid has to be more grown up and cynical about business if he wants to be successful. This is after Sid kills the deal with Orchid Cab, and it sounds suspiciously like something JR would say about Bobby. What we don't get is an explanation as to why Abby would have seduced Richard Avery of all people, given her Machiavellian schemes. But that answer does come a few episodes from now. We also get little bits of Ginger's guilt and unwillingness to deal with Kenny's increasingly concerning behavior, and Karen perhaps overcorrecting a little where Michael is concerned. Those threads are going to get pulled a little later on. For now, just enjoy someone giving the devil a run for his money.
'Cause I've been living life right like I